Hello. Welcome to the Board of Directors of the Redevelopment Agency of Salt Lake City. Today, July 11th meeting. Thank you for those that are joining us in person and those that are joining us through Zoom or watching from the City Council agenda page, Facebook, YouTube, and SLC TV. We hope you will continue to join us in whatever manner you feel most comfortable. We begin the meeting today with comments to the board. I would like to remind you that written comments may be submitted to the RDA offices via mail to P.O. Box 145476, Salt Lake City, Utah 84114, or by emailing us those comments to council.comments@slcgov.com. You can also call us in our 24-hour phone line at the number 801-535-7654. Thank you for joining us tonight. This afternoon, before we start, I want to remind everyone about the rules of decorum, which are in place to ensure our meetings move along well and to help everybody feel comfortable sharing their comments. A copy of those rules of decorum are available at the door, and our staff are going to post those in our Zoom link. If you would like to comment in a public hearing today, we're accepting comments in person and online using Zoom. Scott Corperney from our staff will moderate our Zoom and will message you with any questions about your registration. As you probably know, staff is handling many tasks, so please limit messages to technical issues and minimum information updates. If you need to speak with our staff, please select Scott Corperney from the list of participants. If you need to, you can also raise your hand using the Zoom tool to indicate you need something from the host. Taylor Hill and our staff will be calling those who wish to comment based on the order of their registration. If you are on Zoom, please unmute your mic when Taylor calls your name. We will now open our general comment period. Taylor, please start with our first comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It looks like there's no one registered for general comments.
Okay. Anybody here in person that wants to address the RDA board? Okay. Well, now we're going to move to item C1, which is the redevelopment agency business. We're now on the redevelopment agency business, and our first item is the informational tax increment reimbursement program policy and housing and transit reinvestment zone tax increment reinvestment policy. That rolls out of the tongue so easily. At the table, Allison Rowland, Council Office Policy Analyst, Carl Lindsley, Deputy Director, Danny Waltz, RDA Director.
Push where it says push. There we go. Gotcha. Thank you, Mr. Chair. As soon as I pull up the right document.
Excuse me, Allison. Just one moment while we moderate the mic volumes. John, back in SLC TV, the presenters table seems a little low.
Should I give it a try? That sounds better, right? Okay. So this is an initial briefing on two proposed policy changes to the RDA's tax increment reimbursement policies. The first is our proposed amendments to the existing tax increment policy, and these are designed to simplify and strengthen project criteria for tax increment reimbursement. This may also help RDA staff as they work with developers by clarifying what the expectations are in the city. The second policy change would be a new tax increment policy for housing and transit reinvestment zones, HTRZs, because these areas are subject to different requirements than traditional project areas and are regulated by a separate section of state code. It's really weird to talk with this feedback, so I'm going to pass it over to Danny.
So pass it over to me. That's perfect. Thank you, Allison. Mr. Chair, members of the board, thank you very much. Appreciate the opportunity to be here today. I want to start with some good news. Bad news. The good news is Lauren Parisi, a senior project manager in our office, welcomed her and her husband welcomed a baby over the weekend, so that's exciting. The bad news is that means she's not here today to do this presentation, and you get me. So I apologize for that, but I assure you that Kara will keep me on track and jump in and correct anything I get wrong. So Allison provided a very good high-level description of what this item is. So if it's okay, Mr. Chair, we'll jump right into the presentation, get into the details of what we're proposing as a staff, and then provide opportunity for questions and input from the board. So Taylor, if you could go to the next slide. We thought it would be helpful to start with just a quick recap of what tax increment it is. It's something we speak to a lot, but something that is not always easy for people to remember and understand. So tax increment basically is the amount of the property tax revenue over and above a base year amount. And when we speak in terms of project areas, that's how we set up a project area, and our budget for that area is generated by the tax increment from when we started that project area. With regard to tax increment reimbursements and the agreements that go with it, we're often talking about the incremental property tax revenue from that project itself. So that's important to keep in mind. The reimbursement itself is a payment of a portion of that tax increment that gets paid directly to the developer. It's important to keep in mind these are post-performance. They are not a loan, so they are not paid back, but they are paid to the developer in compensation and consideration for what their project is and the public benefits that are within them. Best practices, therefore, means that you should use increment and reimbursement agreements for the most impactful types of development that you would want to propose within your city. And it's usually warranted by these projects having a high level of public benefits within them, significant costs, or something that creates that gap that justifies this participation. Because of that gap, obviously that gap analysis is a big part of what justifies this level of participation and the demonstrated need. Next slide, please. I think we lost our slides there. If you could see the slide at all, what we would talk through is what's in the memo, which is essentially starting with the two things that are as part of this proposal, starting with the need for a policy and program for our HTRZ project areas, the Housing Transit Reinvestment Zones. The reason for this is the HTRZs have a much more specific in terms of goals and requirements that are called out within statute than what we have in some of our more traditional CRA project areas. They are transit-oriented development that includes affordable housing. They include a list of other allowable uses that can qualify for participation. So as an agency and as a staff, we are proposing to have a policy that is directly tied to just these project areas so that it carries out and aligns specifically with the statute. The policy itself obviously requires a number of thresholds, the first and foremost being that they have to meet the criteria within the HTRZ Act and state statute. We also, they have to demonstrate a gap and warrant the level of participation. They have to conform with the RDA's, next slide please, Taylor. They have to conform with the RDA's sustainability development policy. And then we are also proposing that they require a true activated ground floor space use. If the project involves housing, then within the HTRZ statute right now, only 10% of the units are required to be at 80% AMI. What we're proposing in our policy is to have 20% of the units be at 80% AMI or 10% of the units be at 60% AMI. So that's a slight variation from what's in the statute. Also within, if it's a non-housing project, then those first four standards would apply, conform with the statute, ground floor use, sustainability policy, and have a financial need demonstrated by a gap analysis. And then also that they would have to meet 2 additional of the RDA's qualifying livability benchmarks, and those would be laid out within the policy. The term for the reimbursement would be primarily driven by state statute. The HTRZ statute has different lengths of time for project areas based on whether they're centered around a BRT, light rail, or commuter rail, so that would govern what the term is. And then what we have proposed within the policy is a participation rate for these project areas that 10 to 40% of the increment would be available for public infrastructure projects within the HTRZ area, and then therefore 60 to 90% would be available for participation in the specific developments those then would also include the affordable housing. That is something that we have laid out within our applications, is what the proposed budget is for the areas, and so this would carry it forward into the policy. I'll stop right there on HCRZs if there's any questions specific to this before I move on to the next step.
Can you just go a little bit more in depth on the affordable housing minimums? So we made priorities of family housing and size numbers. So that 20% is just the total, 20% of total units, but we're not specific on 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, 3 bedroom.
Correct.
Studios and that nature.
Correct.
That's just our RDA NOFA type loans where we do that.
Yes.
And is there an appetite to do that here, or is it that too difficult to make those first priority being, say, family housing size, which would be 3 or above, or?
I think that's very much a policy question for you as a board. I think as staff, we would probably agree on a high level with having those priorities carry through these individual reimbursement agreements. However, that is difficult to, one, apply to a policy overall versus what we were looking at probably in the application of that is when we receive these applications and requests, you as a board set those priorities yearly. We would use that to review the requests, and then as part of what we negotiate as the participation, they could hit between that 60 or 90% higher level of increment at the extent of what they hit those other priorities for. So that would be part of the negotiation, that at any given time, knowing what our priorities are, we could potentially negotiate a higher level of increment to the developer if they hit those additional priorities.
Okay, and on the same line, I know we've done it before, talking about the average AMI being at 80% or lower, so that they could adjust. They have 60% ones and then market rate ones to adjust to an 80% level. Is that something here, or is that just more of on the mixed income side of the house? If we were to do mixed income, could you do that, something of that nature here? Say, hey, we're going to have 60% or 40%, 80%, and just mixed income with an average of 80% AMI?
Yes, I think we would still prioritize and have a preference for having a mix of AMIs throughout a project, and we could incorporate that as part of our participation. But as part of just establishing that baseline of what they could qualify for participation, that's at that 80% AMI. And then from there, again, their participation level of what they get could be tied to what level of mixed income they provide within the project. Any other questions specific to HRZ? Okay, next slide, please. With regard to the agency's existing tax increment reimbursement policy, as Allison mentioned, our goal here is to strengthen the requirements and ensure that we're using this for the most transformative projects. So, as we've said, it's a very valuable tool, and we want to make sure that we are looking at providing it for projects that really have that high benefit. So, as staff, what we have proposed is an amendment that tightens that criteria for what projects can qualify, and looking at those threshold requirements to be tied to an economic impact that is regional in nature, has a wide-reaching impact, provides a high level of community benefits. It can also be a project that is of significant scale and scope in terms of at least being 5 acres of land or more, as well as a project that has a significant level of investment, private investment. So the other caveat for threshold is carving out a other specific provision that allows us to do preservation of a historic structure. So we wanted to make sure that that was allowed if there was a project of significance, either the building itself or the level of private investment. But that's at a different level than if you're talking about something like a regional impact, like the Delta Center or Eccles Theater. You can kind of see how those play into a regional nature. So those are the criteria for the minimum threshold of the type of projects. Again, thresholds still apply, still a gap analysis, still has to conform with our sustainability policy and have the activated ground floor space. Housing projects, again, carry that 20% at 80% AMI minimum threshold, or 10%, 60%. Those obviously can change as we get into the negotiations. And then if it's a non-housing project, then they have to meet additional livability benchmarks. And then finally, the difference here, then the HCRZ is the term and participation rate would be negotiated. That's primarily a function of we have project areas at different stages in their life and how many years are available for increment. So that gives us the ability to tie those with the other priorities that we have. And I think that's it. The next slide, please, is just a recap of our values and benchmarks. Kara can correct me if I'm wrong, but if you look at the livability benchmarks at the bottom, I don't believe we're proposing that all of these would be available, so you could just pick 2 and have those be 2 easy ones. They would be more specific to what is a higher level of threshold for the project area, for the project. I'll stop there. Kara can jump in and correct me if there's anything I'm wrong on or that I missed, and otherwise we'll open it up for questions. Oh, I will also say the purpose of today's briefing is just to provide this information, get any input, direction, answer questions, and then we as staff will return with the policies and programs for further discussion, and as we get into those details, we can provide how this evolves.
Board Member Valdemoros.
Thanks, Danny. I have 2 questions. One, I think we've talked about, I've seen a lot of bottom floor activation, like it's one of the requirements. And I think we've talked about how can the RDA help even more, like if there's any gap or any financial need that we can participate so that we can occupy those bottom floors versus what we see in some parts of our city. So I was wondering if that's here, that it's fresh in the mind of this document, that that's something that we would consider for sure if a development was to come, and that's something that they need, that we will be able to somewhat participate on that. And then second, the displacement mitigation, is that just for housing, or could it be as well for businesses that exist, you know, and now they're going to be displaced because they're demolishing the building or something and they're doing something new? And is there any way we can also help those that might have to move temporarily, or we want them to move temporarily so we can help with that, but we want them back in the project? The new
Great
project.
questions. I'll take them in reverse order. Yes, displacement mitigation would apply both to residential and commercial. I think as it relates to commercial, it would tie into the answer then for the first part, which is, as you speak to, the ground floor activation is something that would live both within this agreement as something that could be provided as a reimbursement qualifying expense. And then you will also see that as a board coming to you in a big part as we continue to bring to you our commercial assistance programs and updating those. And so that'll get into, I think, a little bit more of the specifics of what that one can look like and what the role of the RDA can be, and then 2, depending on what that looks like, which tool then can be utilized to address that, and what our role in addressing those could be, or what world we could live in doing that.
Board Member Wharton.
That answered it. Thank you.
Dugan.
Sure. Could you just go a little bit more in detail on the significant economic impact? It's just one of the policy questions, and elaborate on the criteria of providing that. What are some examples of that?
Real high level, significant level impact, as I said, would be something, think the Delta Center, where you're looking at, it's a regional impact. You could get into where you can make the case whether it's for a office tower, if it was going to attract maybe a corporate use that you really wanted, or something like Eccles Theater, where it's more of a entertainment type venue as well. The goal is to try to get it to where, as part of that gap analysis, we're looking at what that overarching economic impact could be in relation to what participation we would have. Not every commercial project probably should utilize this tool. There are some that are either smaller scale or may not have that impact, that we would then steer towards probably our commercial loan programs, because that might be a more appropriate tool. So trying to get it to where it's just kind of creating that threshold of either where the cost impact is, where the significant investment is, and then what the associated benefit is to either the city or the region that could justify which program we should put it in.
Could like, if you had like back to the question about the activating the ground floor level, and you had multiple small businesses and making the area more affordable living, like just affordable housing. And so that doesn't so much have a big regional, but it has a huge local impact, significant in that level. So that would also kind of play in part of that definition.
Yes, you could do that. And then hypothetically speaking, if there was a significant parcel of land potentially on the west side along North Temple that justified looking at that area, and even though that area may develop in a more traditional way, because of that economic impact, that opportunity to maybe infuse some of those public benefits like that within that project, that could make that same argument as well.
I think we're okay. Looking through the list of the benchmarks that you have in there, obviously all of them are important in some ways, in many ways. Obviously for me, if I had to rank them, I would rank them as ownership being one of the things that we really need in the city. And if it was for me, I would put it first. Affordable commercial spaces, it's a big deal for many of us, all of us in some place. And this is a personal one, but adaptive reuse is something that I love, and I know that many of us are very interested in that concept. But obviously there are multiple ways of organizing these benchmarks, and I hope that, like you said, that you just don't put them all there and have them pick. And I am a big proponent of public art, and I love art, and I hope that all of these buildings include art. I don't necessarily want that. Putting it in the same place, then home ownership versus public art, obviously there is a hierarchy of needs in that case, and in my case it will be ownership above the need for public art, but if that makes sense. So if when you build these benchmarks and organize them, and I hope that we can figure out what is the most needed, and I know that you guys are going to do that. So, any other comments from the board? Okay.
Thank you. We will take this and start drafting the policy and program and return as we get a little bit more definition. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on to C2, which is the motion releasing funding for the Affordable Housing Initiative, I need more coffee today, Perpetual Housing Fund. At the table, it is not going to be Jennifer Bruno. Okay, on this table, it's going to be Jennifer Bruno, Deputy Director of the City Council, Danny Walls, RDA Director, Tracy Tran, Senior Project Manager, and Lauren Parisi, Senior Project Manager.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I'll just do a quick orientation and then turn it over to the RDA staff. This is a follow-up conversation to the council's action in budget amendment number 6, where the council adopted $10 million from the city's American Rescue Plan Act funding, ARPA dollars, to go towards this initiative, with the understanding that the RDA staff would return with a draft term sheet to answer some of the council's questions. So if the board is comfortable with the direction of the term sheet, I think the staff would appreciate some direction today of if the council / board is willing to release those funds, as was sort of initially discussed in budget amendment number 6. So that's the sort of general context. I'll turn that over to the RDA staff now.
Great. Thank you, Jen. Thank you, Mr. Chair. We have a real quick presentation that kind of provides a little recap of how we got here. Tracy Tran in our office will go through that, and then I also want to indicate that both Chris Parker and Ashley Atkinson are here from the Perpetual Housing Fund, available to answer any questions. We also have their presentation that you've seen before teed up, so if you really want to get into details or see some of that previous information, we can do that. So I'll turn it over to Tracy, and then we'll provide some time for questions and feedback.
Great, thank you. Next slide, please. So just to give an overview, the Perpetual Housing Fund of Utah is a nonprofit housing organization with the mission of reimagining housing programs to share profits with project residents. The PHF will develop affordable housing units to serve those earning between 25% to 125% AMI. And through this model, 75% of the of the profits that would typically go back to the developer and the investors of the development would instead be returned to the residents of the development as a means of wealth building. Through this profit sharing model, the residents would be able to share in proceeds in the following ways: through an annual rent rebate for my project's cash flow, through a project payout at a time of refinancing or exit of a partner, profit advance that will be available for tenants for major life events, and profit trade-up funds received could also be applied for down payment through their partnership with the Rocky Mountain Homes Fund. Next slide. So this RDA will solidify this partnership by infusing $10 million of the American Rescue Plan Act, or ARPA, funds for the acquisition and development of affordable housing at 515 East, 100 South project. So the adaptive reuse of the existing office building will include 60 plus housing units, of which these 60 units will be affordable to those earning between 25 and 50% of the area median income. The overall project will also include additional housing, co-working space, retail, and daycare space. The project also anticipates having family-size housing of 3 and 4 bedroom units, and overall this will be a significant opportunity to promote wealth building for Salt Lake City residents. Next slide. Just to give a kind of a recap, so the RDA board adopted this guiding framework in recent years that outlines just a general methodology for evaluating and prioritizing projects receiving funds. This chart highlights the benchmarks, the stars in this chart highlights the benchmarks that this project will meet. Next slide. So the benchmarks include leveraging. So our investment will help secure tax credits, which are another form of non-city and non-RDA funds. Ownership, so the project will provide an opportunity for residents to build wealth. Return of investment, this is kind of where this project really stands out. This initial investment will garner a 2 to 6% RDA return through the Perpetual Housing Fund. And there's housing for everyone. This project provides 3 and 4 bedroom units for families and targets underserved populations at 25 to 50% AMI. Mixed income neighborhoods, the larger 515 project will include a mix of affordable AMIs and market rate housing units. And then building preservation, rehabilitation, or adaptive reuse, the project will repurpose and rehabilitate an existing office building for housing. In addition, next slide, please. In addition, the board adopted the following annual housing priorities for fiscal year 24. The 515 project would meet 3 of the 4 priorities: wealth building, affordable family housing, and deeply affordable housing. Next slide. So as a condition of the $10 million budget allocation, the board must review and approve a final term sheet. Here is an overview of the proposed terms. So again, it's $10 million in American Rescue Plan Act funds. There will be a 50-year deed restriction recorded against the property that obligates PHF to develop 60 or more rent and income restricted units at 25 to 50% AMI. Funds will be dispersed in one lump sum to be paid as part of the acquisition of units subject to the recording of a restrictive use agreement on the property and associated subdivision plat process. The PHF also must deploy 100% of the funds by June 24, 2024 for ARPA eligible uses. The PHF will also work to comply with the RDA sustainability policy, but it may be waived if necessary due to the adaptive reuse element of the 515 project. And again, the RDA is to receive 2 to 6% return annually, which will be paid every year. And as part of this partnership, PHF will commit to develop 1,000 additional units in Salt Lake City that will be affordable for those between 25 and 65% AMI. Next slide.
Got it.
There's one more slide. Let's see. Here we go. Okay, so in terms of next steps, the RDA board may wish to discuss the proposed terms to determine if any additional considerations should be made. And upon approval of the term sheet, RDA staff will negotiate the necessary agreements to solidify this partnership. And at this time, we're happy to answer any questions. And as Danny stated, the PHF team is here if there are additional questions for them.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
could I get some clarification? You said in future projects there will be an additional 1,000 units. How is that laid out in the term sheet? And we have specified number of affordability benchmarks and things like that?
So in the term sheet, it's laid out that is a condition of receiving these funds. And then so long as those future projects continue to meet the affordability requirements that we've laid out of the 25 to 85% AMI, then that funding can continue to be utilized within those projects. And then obviously those projects have to be delivered hitting those requirements within the term sheet.
And my understanding of this is that the funding sort of stays with the entity and is able to be used, so the city won't. Is it anticipated that the city will have to put in more funds in order to make those 1,000 units come to fruition?
Yes. So the $10 million is what's the initial investment into PHF, and that's what is used by that entity to continue to do projects and hit those 1,000 units over the next 20 years. We do anticipate that within those specific projects, some of those projects, as the cost of construction to do those projects, may come either to the RDA or obviously apply for tax credits for the construction side of it. But this $10 million will be utilized to continue to acquire properties, establish those through due diligence, and secure the financing to then build them, and then continue to revolve within that entity to build out those 1,000+ units in 20 years.
Any other comments, questions on the board?
I have it.
Valdemar. Sorry.
I have a red one for you. So the $10 million, this is a one-time thing for the acquisition of this property, 515 East, 100 South. That's it, right? Because I understood it's portion of it, and then we'll have some more portion of the $10 million to do something else. I'm confused.
So the $10 million in ARPA funds right now will go straight to PHF. They will utilize that initially for the acquisition of the affordable units within 515.
Okay.
That initial use of the funds, so long as it meets ARPA requirements and is done by June of 2024, meets their obligations for this project and use of those funds.
Okay.
That $10 million, however, also serves as an investment and contribution into the PHF, because it's going to PHF. That is now a part of the Perpetual Housing Fund. In consideration of providing that $10 million, we as the RDA and the city have a seat at the table as part of that PHF entity to ensure that as they continue to do projects, they are obligated that within those projects in Salt Lake City to build out those additional 1,000 units over 20 years. So within the fund, they will continue to use that after this initial project, but that use of the funds for this initial project meets the ARPA requirements.
Okay.
But then PHF as an entity will continue to use those funds and roll that into future projects. We have a seat at the table to have those conversations and just make sure that they are meeting the obligations of getting that $10 million in the future projects.
Okay.
And it took me a long time to figure out how to say that and wrap my head around it.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Board Member Petra.
I've been here in substance and in spirit, thanks to technology. Who is the person? What entity is the purchasing agent? Who will be the purchaser of this property?
I would be happy to have Chris Parker explain this in more detail, because they probably have a more structured base, but it's our understanding that the lead purchaser will be the Perpetual Housing Fund of Utah.
Lead purchaser begs that there might be subsidiary partners. Who are those?
I don't want to speak out of two. So it is our understanding the project is going to be condominiumized, so there will be other owners and purchasers.
I'm Chris Parker with the Perpetual Housing Fund. Hi, I'm Chris Parker with the Perpetual Housing Fund. So Perpetual Housing Fund of Utah is the real estate owning entity.
Will you speak a little closer to the mic? I'm sorry. Thank you.
So Perpetual Housing Fund of Utah is the real estate holding entity, and then Perpetual Housing Fund is a 501c3 that controls that. So Perpetual Housing Fund of Utah will be what all projects that are owned and developed by Perpetual Housing Fund are owned by, unless there's a single purpose entity per project for liability reasons that's owned by Perpetual Housing Fund of Utah. But the money from the city, the thing that's doing the work is Perpetual Housing Fund of Utah, which is controlled by the 501c3.
So when I look up this real estate record and it's past, it will be Perpetual Housing Fund that was the purchaser.
Correct. Perpetual Housing Fund of Utah.
Okay. And are there any other here's what I'm seeing here. First of all, I'm a little frustrated that we're being asked to do the release today. When we did the initial approval last time, and this has nothing to do with you, when we did the approval last time, it was with the contingency that we would have a term sheet completed with it. Now we're releasing the funds and being asked to push back approval of a term sheet, and the risk that we're assuming here is just getting a little bit unbearable for me. We have a lot of really good ingredients here. We know that other places have done this well. What I don't know is, what is the recipe? Because we could really screw this up still. And with a housing market increasingly under stress, I don't feel like subjecting people who are depending on the success of this and the success of our investing $10 million in a thought experiment, in something that we didn't vet the recipe for. So I'm not trying to be critical of what you're bringing to us. I think the process on this is highly frustrating to me that we're being asked to do this right now. But what I'm trying to secure here with this line of questioning with you is that we know all the ingredients. I know we don't finance personalities, but Chris, you have a great reputation and your work has done good things already. Taking a risk with you is still nerve-wracking. It still goes outside of what my personal ethics for using public funds says I should do. However, it gives me a little more risk tolerance. I need to know if there's other ingredients here that could compromise the success. If there are partners, co-signers, collaborators, anything at any point that I have yet to be given the chance to vet, to make sure that when we are doing what we know we need to do, there's not other opinions, viewpoints, economic interests competing with that.
Sure.
So that's the nexus of my line of questioning and the how it's resulting from the frustration that I'm having to make this decision without an actually completed term sheet in front of me. And I understand LIHTC and deadlines and all that. Still frustrating.
Sorry, just chiming in, and I just so that our staff can own part of the frustration in communicating. I think that we were looking in discussing with the administration. They were saying it would be helpful to have a straw poll about the funds so that PHF could continue their application. The term sheet is mostly finalized, but they were going to ask you to approve that term sheet in the August meeting. But what felt awkward is if there was not interest in moving forward, it felt like that was an important thing to signal at this meeting. So it was more, I guess it could have been formed in the reverse question. So that the RDA staff didn't continue working on it if the council was not interested in moving forward. So there's kind of a two-part decision-making thing, but one is highly dependent on the other, if that makes sense. So
I just don't like how asynchronous it is. We took that last vote indicating that that's what this 10 million was intended for. The synchronizing of these, to me, would have been logical and in accordance with what we voted last time.
Question. So Jen, what you're saying is, so the staff report says they're requesting the release of the term. That's different than the straw poll saying go for it, come back in August, and then we'll release it.
Kind of see them as the same thing. Yeah, in my mind, if the council does not support the project, there's no point in releasing the funds, right? So I see them as related.
Okay.
So I think the board could make this decision in August and it would be fine. I think what our staff was seeing is that if the board was a no on releasing the funds, I feel like that would be a helpful thing to tell the administration now so that more work was not done on it with the application due at the end of August and causing frustration on that end. Does that make sense?
I still,
Or if
I
there
still
were-
don't understand. Are we being redundant in the vote to purpose the money for this, or are we being redundant? Are we actually giving dollars earlier than getting a final term sheet handled? Which of those two is happening today?
So I think whatever you guys want to happen today can happen today.
What I want to happen today is a finalized term sheet with the full confidence that I have the recipe and I'm already sold on the ingredients. I want the recipe. That's what the term sheet is to me. Ideally, that's what I would have. I'm not going to get that today. So I'm at peace with that. What I want is the resolution of my concerns that gets us the closest to dealing with public dollars with fidelity and making sure that we're dealing with a vulnerable housing population with as much care as we can while innovating something that has yet to happen in our city.
So maybe what would be a most helpful thing is to focus on the term sheet that you guys do have in front of you, since it's mostly final, and let the RDA staff know is if it's going in the right direction.
And adding on to that, thank you, Jen. I think that's a great way of putting it. I can speak to the fact that the term sheet as it's in the packet right now is essentially what we are proposing. The only two updates or changes that we would have to that term sheet would be one, what is referenced within the transmittal memo.
Can we put this, the term sheet on the screen for everybody to see so that you help us? Is that okay? Sorry, I'm asking on the fly.
Yeah, are you talking about the slide? So within your packet, there's more detailed version of that full term sheet. So I need to look for it. There's a
Yeah.
It's in the administration's transmittal starting on page 6. It's also, there's some bullet points about it in the staff report.
Attachment A.
Just following up, as I was saying, one addition that would probably come back to you within the finalized term sheet would be finalizing the reference to language regarding the concentrated community reinvestment plan. Concerted. I knew I had that wrong. The CCRP, again, referenced in the memo, but we would most likely include some language in the term sheet referencing that. And then the other change that you would see in the term sheet is just some updated language regarding the level of the condominium plat that would need to be recorded and finalized prior to funding. That would most likely be a preliminary level versus finalized, since that takes a little bit longer. I'm going to turn it over to Ashley with PHF real fast to make sure I've got everything, or if there's something you want to add to that.
No, that's correct. I just wanted to clarify from earlier, the purchase of the building will be in a special purpose entity because LIHTC will require that. Perpetual Housing Fund of Utah and/or Perpetual Housing Fund will be the sole owners of that special purpose entity.
What's the name of the special purpose entity?
It's 515 Tower LLC.
Which currently is 100% owned by Perpetual Housing Fund of Utah.
Correct.
So a disregarded entity.
So having said that, that would be what we would propose returning as staff in August for approval, and then also incorporating any input or direction we received today.
I think there is some light reading happening right now. I can, board member.
Yeah, we're just trying to locate it. Do you remember what the file name is?
Is it in the staff?
Yeah, it's at the end of the staff report. It says
Over there.
page 6.
It's coming on the screen right now, it seems like.
Past the PowerPoint presentations.
Okay. Scott, that's not it. Hold on, let me pull it up.
There we go. We got it.
I'm just going to share it just a sec.
I'm here. I don't know. It says page 6 at the end. Attachment A.
Page 73 of the PDF.
Okay.
So starting with attachment A here.
I know. We have that one.
Yeah. So for those in the audience, we are getting a new screen. That lower right one is broken, so patience, please. But the board can see them on this screen here. Board members, let me know when you're okay with me scrolling.
Yes. That's me right there.
So Danny, the PHF, like, so at the beginning it says, hold on, the parties, so the Perpetual Housing Fund of Utah, it's an LLC. It's, so the RDA is part of the PHF, like we're partners, like, so it's a PHA and RDA, so we're both responsible for this project to happen, in a way.
We are considered an equity investor.
An equity investor, okay.
Not necessarily the at-risk developer.
We're the equity investor, okay.
Yeah.
And as Ashley indicated, each project that PHF will do will likely be a specific purpose entity, both for the sake of just managing the real estate development itself, as well as applying for tax credit financing or other funding.
And if it's helpful with questions about who is part of the entity, we can also have PHF send out like an org chart if that helps explain things a little more.
That would be very helpful, please.
Yeah.
Board Member Wharton.
So just ground aside and like who owns the actual building aside, if there's another partner or that is buying up a significant amount of the units, how would the city continue to maintain control and oversight in that situation?
So what the city would have control and oversight of is the amount of units we're promising. So the ones that are 25 to 55% AMI in the 515 building will have no other parties attached to them. They'll have no other decision making within them. The building itself is a very large structure, and it will have different components that will own
Right.
by their various LLCs. Those parties will have no ability to talk about the 515 units. And similarly, we would be developing for them their units, and they would more or less get to decide on their units.
Okay, and
what
there'll
they'd
be
like.
things in the contract as well that they can't do something with or use of those units that would like fundamentally interfere with the quiet enjoyment of the other residents that are part of the city's part.
No, and in fact, most tax credit investors will require, even if you are only a plurality of condo unit owners, you still have the majority vote. So the controller of the building will be this entity that's controlled by PHF of Utah.
Okay.
Board Member Petro.
So I realize maybe I've been operating under a false assumption. I'm assuming that the part that the city is investing in is dependent on the other part of the development being developed and operated. If we were to give you this 10 million, you could do it in isolation without the rest of these? Is that what you're saying? Sorry, Ashley was nodding. Sorry, I was responding to her nod.
And in fact, your money will not, it's currently drafted such that your money doesn't touch the building until such time as you have your own condos. So you
but
wouldn't-
because we're in the same building as them, is there a possibility that a partner in the other part of the building where maybe our money isn't coming into contact could do something that could sabotage? I'm interested in safeguarding the integrity of this 10 million and the project that we're undertaking.
Yeah, so we are too. So we have already drafted CCNRs for the project. They're actually with the city. We've
CCNRs?
Correct.
What is that? Sorry.
Conditions, covenants, and restrictions.
Thank you.
And those are obviously in our favor, in PHF's and the city's favor. And Danny's welcome to review those, or any of you, but they're with the city and for approval.
I'd actually like Danny to, and Tammy, can I ask you too as well? Would you mind reviewing those CCNRs as well? I don't know if that's getting out of my lane, but I value Tammy's insight on things like these. Thank you, Tammy. That's a personal, I owe you coffee for that.
Yeah, as Ashley indicated, that's what our seat at the table with PHF provides, is not just with this project, but future projects to have that involvement.
So I think it seems to me that, to boil it down, this might be a little concern, right? That the parts that they're not getting the funds from the city could potentially sabotage the other part of So knowing that, that's something that we are interested in learning more, and how we're protecting the city's investment, but also those tenants and those neighbors. So I think that's an important piece. But granted that, is there
any
other
safeguard for the integrity of what we're attempting to do here? It's a relatively large amount of money compared to the number of units we're getting. As discussed, it's worth it because the potential outcome and paradigm shift and model shift that we're doing are something worth investing in. But I'm a firm believer that if you're doing something new and innovative, you have it's incumbent upon you to do extra due diligence and to mitigate as much risk as possible.
Right.
So
And
anything that does that
And
is
I will
helpful.
say that is actually an impressive amount of units for the money that we're investing, right? Because $10 million for 1,000 units is an incredible amount, right? But I
The
take
1,000
your
units
point.
are in addition. We're only
Correct.
investing in a certain number.
Correct. But I think that I think your point has been taken, right? And I think that is a very much of a concern of this board. Any other board member?
I have a question.
Board
So
members.
I have PTSD, certain things that we've done. But so let's say the world shifts and this project doesn't happen. So we're 5 years in, or no, let's not say 5 years, we're 2 years in, and this project doesn't happen for whatever reason. Nobody's fault necessarily, the economy changes, whatever, the market changes. Are we getting our money back? And if we are we gonna get penalized because it's ARPA funding? So it's something that was supposed to be spent and used, but now it's not. And so now we have $10 million, assuming that whatever agreement that we have, you guys have negotiated, we'll get our $10 million back. And then we have $10 million in our hands. And then we're like, okay, we should have spent it. We couldn't. What do we tell the feds?
Great question. That's entirely why, with the purpose of this $10 million in the initial investment, we have set it up to where it meets the ARPA requirements with simply the acquisition of essentially the units within this project for the purpose of affordable housing. So long as PHF buys that condominiumized piece of this building for the purpose of building the housing units, as long as we close on that acquisition and disperse the funds for that by June of 2024, we meet the ARPA requirements. So what that does is that meets the ARPA requirements. However, the requirement to still build out the units is affordable, as well as the other 1,000 units. Those obligations continue, but those timelines are no longer set to meet the ARPA requirements. So if the project suddenly takes 3 or 4 years versus 2, we're not in danger of not meeting the ARPA requirements as much as we're now just in the part of our funding agreement requirements that they have to continue to meet. So does that make...
Yeah, okay, yeah.
The term sheet you have in front of you is what essentially outlines that funding agreement, which not only takes the ARPA requirements, but then adds everything else we're talking about here and addresses your concerns. And then that's also what can get translated into what other agreements we may have to enter into, or whatever level we enter into agreements with PHF. It carries all of those requirements into those different legal agreements that then they have to follow. I'm looking at you to see if I missed anything.
So
Did that answer your question in terms of
the second part,
time?
it does, but the first part, it says, events of default under the restrictive use or funding agreements may include but are not limited to PHF fails to construct the 515 project within the time frame provided in the funding agreement. So what does that mean? Does that mean, I don't know what the remedy is. I guess I'm not looking. Are we getting our money back or not? Maybe that's the simplest question.
So you will have within the funding agreement, as well as potentially operating with PHF, that will outline at what point, worst case scenarios, we could pull our money back.
Okay.
Everything between that initial ARPA requirement and the absolute worst case scenario will have different levels of recourse that we have.
Okay.
Standard legal recourse, pulling it out, providing notice of default, all of those things. Happy to have Katie or Allison come up and speak to that. But you will have those protections, not just within our funding agreement, but then also within whatever level of agreements we have with PHF to ensure that we have those clawback provisions.
Okay.
part of the reason we looked at having that time frame of building the 1,000 units is anticipating exactly what you're saying, is we didn't want to be overly optimistic if there were continued shifts in the market, but to have this stretch out at a realistic time frame. We're confident we'll be able to do it sooner, but as far as laying out what those recourse provisions and those milestones of when we have that, we want to be also realistic in what makes sense. We're putting those within legal agreements.
Okay.
I don't know if
All
you're
right.
going to jump in and add to that.
Sure, thanks.
Yeah, it seems, board member, so it seems, would it be fair to say that we can make the decision next month on this, on the next RDA meeting, so we can go through some of those questions? It seems like we're not too far to get clarification on those, so that will give us a few more weeks to work through that. Is that okay? Okay, let's do that. Board member Dugan?
Yeah, I think there's consensus here that we are excited about it, but we have a couple of questions that we need to just want to close up. But there is willingness and desire for the program. We just have a couple questions that Councilmember Petro, Board Member Petro raised.
Yeah.
But there is a desire for it all. Again, we're not the developer experts here, so our questions may sometimes seem simple to you, but they're still they really use a lot of brain power here to kind of put together in our heads, so, and allay our fears. So I think that's.
Right.
I mean, I will speak for myself. Obviously, I'm excited for this idea. I'm supportive of it. I would like to move forward. There's important questions that I think they're important to answer. I also think that you put in the packet the draft term sheet. Maybe what it will be helpful is to flag it again during this time and the next meeting to make sure that we can look into it a little more in depth and answer our questions, and maybe we can go back and forth if there isn't some need between now and the next meeting.
Mr. Chair, I just wanted to also express my support. I think it's we're revolutionizing the housing, in Salt Lake City, so it's worth a try. I think these wealth building mechanisms that we've been talking about for a long time through housing and home ownership or equity or whatever it is, I feel like we've been trying from every angle to help, minimize a little bit of the housing crisis, but especially building wealth. And District 4, especially in parts of District 4, we need that. We have some opportunities happening and coming, and maybe it's us manifesting to the universe, please, bring some of these opportunities, but they are coming. And I think this is one of them, so I'm super excited. It's just the questions here and there because of our, maybe some ignorance in terms of development and how these deals get done, but we want to make sure that we're getting the biggest bang for our buck. It's the taxpayers' money, and so that's why all of the questions. So don't feel that we're not supportive. We are. Thank you.
And not just that, to add on to that, I think because this can be it's a new project, especially for our community and the way that we're doing it, that if it is as successful as we hope it will be, a lot of people are going to want to know how we did it, and they're going to ask questions about how we did it, and we want to be able to answer those questions at every step in the process. So
Perfect.
I understand the concern, is what I'm saying. Thanks for your questions.
No, thank you. I appreciate everybody's feedback. Thank you for answering those questions on the fly. We are punting this decision until the next meeting, but it seems like you have good willing partners here to keep on working on this. We're going to item C3, the resolution, the amendment to terms for loan to Bill 1659 LLC and clarification of housing development loan program. Allison Roland from the Council Office Policy Analyst at the table. Danny stays on his chair. RDA Director Austin Taylor joins, Project Manager, and Tracy Tran, Senior Project Manager, at the table now. Thank you, Allison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chair. This resolution essentially, there are essentially two parts to this resolution. The first would modify the Housing Development Loan Program, or HDLP loan, for the Ville 1659 project on North Temple, which you probably know as the former Ramada Inn. Last January, the board approved $1 million in special NOFA funding for this purpose, and last fall, the council also approved $2 million for this project through CAN's new Homeless Housing Grant Program. The amendments would change the type of the loan from a construction gap loan with cash flow payments to a bridge loan with a balloon payment at the end of the term. It would also reduce the term of the loan from 40 years to 3. The total project cost would fall from $18.3 million to $16.9 million, so it would drop by $1.4 million. And the funding shifts would also include an increase in the size of the debt that is senior to the RDA's loan. That amount would be $1.6 million. It would reduce the owner equity by $1.1 million and the developer fee by $720,000. And it would also raise the financing costs by $1.5 million, among other changes. So there's the total amount is smaller, and there are lots of other shifts in the financing underneath that smaller amount. The second part of the resolution would approve a clarification in the HDLP resolution that you approved last January. This would state that if a project does not receive tax credits in the next allocation cycle, the funding would need to be returned to the RDA. This would apply to all projects approved in the NOFA funded by the board at that time that rely on the low-income housing tax credit, or LIHTC, including the VL 1659 project. That's my introduction.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Allison did a great job of teeing it up. I'll turn it over to Austin and Tracy for the presentation.
Danny, if we could go to the next slide, please.
Hi. Is your microphone on?
Now it's on.
Now it's
Thank you. Okay. So as was said before, we're talking about amending the loan for VIL 1659, which is a project that the board, approved a $1 million HDLP loan for. As a refresher, this project is located at 1659 West North Temple. It's a conversion of a mid-century hotel, formerly the Ramada Inn. It would bring online 197 studio apartments affordable to those households making 30% AMI or less. It would have 10 on-site RV parking sites with electrical, sewer, and water hookups. The Ramada Inn, this hotel also currently has on-site mental health care through Mental Health of America and the Taste of India restaurant. We'll go to the next slide. So this is an update of the sources and uses, and one thing we wanted to clarify is that this project does not rely on the low-income housing tax credit. So the slight change that we're proposing in the HDLP terms do not apply to this project. Well, let's go to the next slide. And this is really what we're asking you to consider today, is a change in the loan terms. What you all approved was essentially a construction to perm loan of $1 million that would be repaid in cash flow terms over a period of 40 years. As we did our underwriting, we saw that there was more of a need for a short-term bridge loan on this project and not as much of a need for long-term assistance. And so what we're proposing is a bridge loan at that same $1 million loan amount with a payment that would be paid at the end of the term, which we're proposing as 3 years, or if the project is refinanced and can pay that off earlier. We're also proposing a 1% interest rate, and this project qualifies for that 1% through existing HDLP guidelines due to many project priorities that it meets. And then that's all the information that I need to present to you, and I'll turn it over to Tracy for the next item.
Yeah, and then the second item that Allison had mentioned was the condition clarification for the last round of the Housing Development Loan Program. And this is just to clarify.
Oh yeah, next slide.
Oh, sorry, I changed my slide, but not that. So it's just a condition to clarify So initially, the condition was included to ensure that funds would not be held up. So there was just a time frame. So if a project did not receive tax credits, they would return the funds and they would reapply the next year. So the condition states that if a project does not receive the 9% tax credits, the funds would be returned to the RDA Housing Development Loan Program. All we're adding is also the 4% tax credits to this clarification. So it now reads, if project does not receive 9% tax credits or an allocation of the tax-exempt bonds for the 4% tax credits, funds would need to be returned to the Housing Development Loan Program. So that is reflected in the updated resolution that should be in your packet. And with that, we're happy to answer any questions that you may have.
I just want to, I don't have a question, I don't know. I want to remember one of the things that happened. It's very exciting to see 10RB parkings, and board member Petro was who reached out to the developer and brought that idea to them, and it's very exciting to see that in the project. So it's a very exciting thing, and I hopefully more projects include this, and that's something that I hope that we keep on our radar when we're talking about development and using RDA or city funds. RB spots are very much need across the city. So I think that I'm very excited to see that come to fruition. Thank you. Any thoughts? We're okay? I think we're okay with that one. It seems like 30 minutes was not needed for that one.
I think we do need consideration of the
motion?
Resolution, yes.
Possible action needed, yes. So I'm looking for a motion to approve.
Mr. Chair, I move that we approve the amendment to the terms for the loan of the Villa 1659 LLC.
Second.
So I have a motion by Board Member Dugan and a second by Board Member Petro. Any discussion?
Mr. Chair?
Sorry.
Yes?
Sorry, just want to make sure that the other clarification was also included in that motion.
Oh, okay, sorry. I'll amend my motion. I move that the board amend the terms of the loan to Villa 1659 LLC and clarification of the Housing Development Loan Program.
Is that okay with your second? Okay. So we have a motion by Board Member Dugan and a second by Board Member Petro. Any discussion? Seems like we are okay. Board Member Valdemoras?
Yes.
Board Member Dugan?
Yes.
Board Member Wharton?
Yes.
Board Member Petro?
Yes.
And I'm a yes. And we have Board Member Mano not on the room right now. So 6 to 1 absent. 5 to 1 absent, and 1 missing. I don't know. Thank you. It moves forward.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So we are report and announcements from the Executive Director, Danny.
Our Executive Director is being played today by Rachel Otto.
Yes. Danny, she's not. Any other?
She's going to punt it to me. Yes, we do have a few project updates, Mr. Chair, if I may. First and foremost, wanted to inform the board that we were successful in receiving a $495,000 grant for environmental cleanup through brownfields funding for our property at 22 South Jeremy Street. You remember, as a board, that's property we own along Folsom Corridor. That is one of the targeted areas within our North Temple project area. So this will go a long ways towards redeveloping that property. Our goal is to establish it as a small-scale, trail-oriented, and affordable commercial space for local businesses along the Folsom Corridor. So pleased to report that. Mr. Chair, we appreciate you joining in the celebration a couple weeks ago of Paper Box Lofts at 160 South 300 West. The RDA provided $3.2 million land write-down for securing 39 affordable units within their 195. Also included are 14 live workspaces, and 4 of those units are ADA compliant. So that's an exciting project. Not to throw chairman under the bus, but he was a little giddy about the car stacking part of the project.
Are you kidding? I almost interrupted to tell you I had to play with the elevator, car elevator. So that's awesome.
So for those of you who aren't aware, Carvana has nothing on this project in terms of like this parks 126 cars in the space of what it would take to park 27. So it's a pretty interesting component of the project.
Is that the first one in Utah, or is this our second one?
I know it's the tallest in Utah. I can't remember if we got to be the first or if it's second, but.
Okay.
It's very fun.
I'll say it's the premiere. That's
premiere.
What I'll say. Okay.
It's premiere. So that's exciting. One other update. We've been informed by the Housing Assistance Management Enterprise, HAME, regarding the Atkinson Stacks project. This received $500,000 of funding within our most recent NOFA. They have run into problems regarding other funding commitments and need to reapply for funding. The former project, if you recall, was going to utilize shipping containers, and it was going to be built right next to Pamela's Place. HAME is now moving the components of that project across the street. They're going to build a new structure adjacent to their Sunrise Metro project. But because that literally is a different project on a different piece of property, we have withdrawn that funding commitment, and they will most likely reapply in this next NOFA project. So just a quick update on that. And then finally, I believe everyone received on the dais as you sat down an annual report and update and note on the Bicycle Collective project. That is tracking to be completed by the end of the year. So we're looking forward to seeing that project done, and we will obviously celebrate the ribbon of cutting of that when it arrives. That's all I have, Mr. Chair, unless you have any other questions.
Looks like there is no questions. Board member.
I wanted to say something. Congratulations on the 30th anniversary of the Gallivan. It happened last week. You had a lot of people on Thursday celebrating the Gallivan Center. So can't believe it's been 30 years. It seems like it's become such a jewel downtown. So a lot of people were asking me what's next for the Gallivan. So I'll ask you what's next. Let us know what's next for.
That I appreciate. I didn't know you're such a good softball player, so I appreciate that pitch. Yes, we, in fact, literally today, I think the consultants just started sending out invites and emails to stakeholders to meet as we've engaged GSBS to start looking at what the next future of Gallivan looks like. So they will be reaching out to stakeholders to meet with them and gather input and information on what we can or cannot recommend for the next 30 years of Gallivan. So thank you.
Awesome. And then we will be having a watch party for the women's soccer World Cup at the Gallivan July 21st and July 26th. We're co-hosting with Real Salt Lake.
Oh, that's exciting.
Yeah, so is then doing hosting one at the U, so they can watch it there too.
Board member Wharton.
I heard there was going to be roller skating at the Gallivan. That's just what someone said.
We are trying to look at that. Talitha continues to want to do that, so yes.
Funding might be held by Congressman
It
Wharton.
seems like it'd be, a really easy way to activate the space, but.
And there is pickleball on Gallivan right now.
Oh,
so
you did ask for questions, so it's
I opened myself up for that. Yes, thank you.
Reports from Chair and Vice Chair. Okay, and there is no written briefings or consent agenda. Council Vice Chair Petro, when do you want to reconvene for Council?
Can we do to 45? Can we do 3:45?
You can do whatever you
Yeah,
want.
let's do 3:45.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for the meeting.
Thank you very much.